The world is changing faster than ever before. In the past 10 years, there has been an exponential technological evolution, the kind of technology that has revolutionized the world of work as we know it.
The Lawyers Hub was founded on the principle that law needs to interact more with technology, and that greatly affects tech policy as well as access to justice. So the Lawyers Hub exists as a confluence between law and technology, working on tech policy, on emerging technologies, as well as increasing and upskilling the knowledge of lawyers in the area of technology. We support tech startups as well to ensure that the tech ecosystem also engages in policy, but as well understand the issues around data protection, issues that also concern their structure, as well as intellectual property.
If you look at the evolution of technology, it's been relegated as an alternative in most systems. But the realization that 21st century has brought us into is that technology has to be an integral part of our day-to-day systems. And if you look at some critical technology areas like artificial intelligence, blockchain, nanotechnology, biotechnology, then it gives us a strong indication that if we do not start having discussions on the use of these technology areas, as far as law is concerned, then we may be in some kind of trouble. So Lawyers Hub is leading the debate on the use of these technologies, especially in Africa.
Over the years, the Lawyers Hub has supported the innovation ecosystem, convened events such as the Africa Law Tech Festival and the Global Legal Hackathon. The Lawyers Hub has also supported government innovations within the justice sector, as well as trained government institutions and more than 10,000 lawyers across Africa on emerging tech policy.
Our dream at the Lawyers Hub is to have open access to law. We envision a continent where there is access to justice through leveraging technology and with a crowd of enlightened lawyers. We see a continent that also protects its own through better tech policies, that emerging technologies, through its regulation, will offer better value and consumer protection for the people within Kenya and within the African continent. We envision that we will convene policy makers, regulators, as well as lawyers who are more enlightened on emerging technologies and with better digital skills. And we invite you to be a part of this great vision for Kenya and for Africa.
So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session, this webinar on the future of African economies, recession, digitalization, and the business of law, organized by the LSK Kisumu chapter's rapid response team, led by Honorable Mwamu, President. The rapid response team was formed to look into the welfare of lawyers during this COVID-19 pandemic, in areas of welfare, even in the professional area. We must thank the Kisumu chapter for being part of this, for enabling everything to have gone on as smooth as it has, and to give us that operating space. That is what has enabled us to come up with this webinar. And without much ado, I'll call upon our chairman, President Mwamu, to introduce the topic, to introduce the panelists, and to get us started. Thank you very much.
James needs to unmute. James, you need to unmute.
Kindly unmute your speaker.
James needs to unmute.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. As Betty has said, James Mwamu is my name. I'm the chairman of the LSK Kisumu Chapter Rapid Response Team. Today we have very many well-versed speakers who are going to speak to us about many things. We have Kwame Owino. Kwame is the Chief Executive of the Institute of Economic Affairs, a think tank policy that is based in Kenya. Kwame, welcome. We have Silva Kadondo. Silva Kadondo is a dual-trained Ugandan and South African lawyer. He focuses on assisting businesses, innovators, and investors in shaping the trajectory of the fourth industrial revolution. You will explain to us, Kadondo, what that means, this fourth industrial revolution on the African continent, by deploying skills, knowledge, and experience. Then we have, of course, Don. Don is not a stranger to many of us. I think maybe a stranger to Muru Patel. Don there is the Chief Executive for Pan-African Lawyers Union. He previously served as the Chief Executive of East African Law Society and also acting CEO of Kenya section of International Commission of Jurists, ICJ, and he was also the Deputy CEO of the Law Society of Kenya. Don, because he has traversed the entire Africa from Tunis and Cairo to Johannesburg, will be telling us how this COVID-19 has affected African law firms and what is the way forward. How can we then move forward? And then finally we have Dr. Muru Patel. Dr. Muru Patel is the CEO of Let's Beat Corona. Let's beat Corona out of the world. He's an innovative serial entrepreneur, and he does many things. He's also an international speaker. Today, although he's a citizen of the UK, but he's speaking from Romania today. So may I then welcome Betty to continue calling the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our chairman, Mr. Mwamu. I would like to call upon Linda to take us through any house rules that we may need, and perhaps to say something as a host before our speakers begin.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'll be hosting you from today at the Lawyers Hub. My name is Catherine Moya. I'm a tech policy fellow at the Lawyers Hub. And the Lawyers Hub is an organization that serves Africa and the global south. And what it does, it seeks to explore and give policy alternatives in terms of technology and access to justice. And so in this regard, we have held a lot of work in terms of tech policy, and we have tried and hosted a lot of webinars to help lawyers navigate through this pandemic. And so today we're hosting the Law Society of Kenya in their topic, which is the future of African economies, recession, digitization, and the business of the law. And so we're gonna ask, we're looking forward to this discussion, and for house rules, we're just gonna ask that you mute your mics if you're not speaking, and we allow the panelists to go on. And we'll take questions at some point after they're done giving the introductory remarks. And you can post your questions on the chat or on the Q&A, and we'll be able to just read them through, or you can also raise your hand and we can be able to pick on you and answer questions when the time comes. And so I think that if you're watching us from YouTube, you can also use the live chat platform and just raise your questions at that point, and we can be able to follow them through. So thank you, and I hope you have a great discussion.
Linda, for agreeing to host us. We will not waste time. We'll go on to the panelists. To start it off will be Silva. That will be our first speaker today. Silva Kayondo, who will tackle issues of digital banking and how economies in Africa can innovate to survive during the COVID-19. We will give each of the speakers an initial 10 minutes to take us through their areas of discussion. Thereafter, we'll see whether there are any questions that will be specific to their areas. And then perhaps we see whether there are any other general questions. So without wasting time, allow me to welcome our first speaker to take us through his topic. Mr. Silva, please.
All right, thank you so much. I salute you all panelists and everyone attending. Greetings from Kampala, and it is a pleasure for me to link all the way to Kisumu. My name is Silva Kayondo, as you might have heard. I am a partner with a law firm called Otis Advocates.
It appears would kindly just ask you to recheck your connection and just get back to us. Betty, if you could probably just assist.
Pardon?
We have appeared to have lost the connection.
Yeah, we have lost the connection. I wonder why.
Maybe you could pick on someone else to begin, and we could back to him at a later time.
We could go to the next.
Technology,
I can see Silva.
I can speak about digital banking if you want. That's what I've done. 2 of them.
I don't know what will happen when he comes back, but perhaps we could go to Mr.
Yeah, I can talk about digital banking if you want. And then when Silva comes in, we can have a little debate. No problem.
Yeah, I think we can do that so as to save on time.
Save on time and internet connection. So shall I kick off?
Yes, Mr. Patel, please go ahead.
Okay, so my name's Muru Patel. Thank you, James Mwame, ex-Kisumu alumni friend, for giving us the opportunity to address you all. I feel like a connection over here with everybody. I think Don's Arusha, my father was there, we were talking about. He's having problems now, he's speaker, but a lot of my relatives were born and bred in Kampala and Jinja and places like that, and Kisumu, so very much connected over here. Let's talk about digital banking and the challenges, what, where, why, how, and what's stopping it, and how Africa can really take this on board to change the landscape of being self-sufficient rather than how Africa can depend on people. So I think the technology now in terms of digital banking is totally misunderstood by a lot of people out there. And I speak, as James said, around the world on this subject as well as asset tokenization. In my view, why did digital banking really take off? What's happened is my background is Sun Microsystems and Internet and Java when it first happened. And we were talking about, contactless way of everyone doing any form of transactions because now the internet was there. However, there was a small piece missing, which is now called digital currency. So we had lots of payment providers who went onto it and provided a service where I would say 90% of the people could take advantage of, meaning put money in their account, withdraw it or spend it. However, the banks, in my view, and I'm not a big fan of traditional banks, have been taking advantage of it. Hence why so many big glass tower buildings and multiple layers of management and lots of costs that the client ended up paying. So what happened is neobanks with cryptocurrency started sprouting up. And what that did was it gave the independent to choose who he actually banks with. And what this disruption did was it brought transaction fees down to virtually nothing or free. It brought instant remittances and instant wire transfers. So the SWIFT, the MasterCards, the PayPals, and all these people got threatened. Now, without getting into politics, we know that these are the people who have effectively controlled the world economy and the world of finance. With something like $7 trillion of daily transactions, you can imagine the number of people that are behind all of this. You just got to look back in history and see how money actually got created, okay? In my view, Africa is currently being, sorry to say, raped by a lot of these organizations where Africans are paying a lot more in their transaction fees for banking, okay? Right down to some of the neo startups. look at M-Pesa on your doorstep. The charges M-Pesa, I mean, it's criminal in my view, what they charge the average person who probably gets less than $50 or $100 salary in transaction fees. And it's not right, okay? So what neobanks and what we are doing now as well is trying to make not banking free, but trying to make banking paid. Here's what I mean by that. If you are a client, we will pay you to be the client. Can you imagine those days happening? It can. The reason being, the technology adoption now with blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and different variations of mining, staking, advertising, and all these things that can be put on the mobile, your client, just by owning the wallet, can earn money because he banks with you. So these technologies are available now, albeit very, very new, and we are developing something like that to absolutely bring it to Africa. So you don't have to go to the bank to deposit money. Everything's done instant through your wallet, and you get paid for every transaction, and you get paid for just being a user because you get targeted information coming to you rather than all the junk information that a lot of people send to you. So in my view, digital banking going forward will have a total omni-channel view. What do I mean by omni-channel? You will have a single view of your mobile app with your wallet. You could have normal fiat currencies, you could have cryptocurrencies, you could have multiple bank accounts, multiple credit cards, multiple loyalty points, etc., etc., all through that same mobile app. So you could send money to your friend, brother, mother, sister, uncle instantly through his mobile. All he does is tap and pays for whatever he buys, right down to his vegetables, through maybe a QR code or SMS or something like that. But it's going towards QR code and NFC, which is contactless. That's where the world is going. Imagine now people like myself and other Africans who are abroad in the diaspora, and I've been talking to a lot of people in the African diaspora as well. I'm a member over there, where they're trying to take this to another level, meaning those people who want to send money back to their home country for their relatives, they have to go through the normal banking system. Then the person they send it to has to go through, dare I say it again, Western Unions or MoneyGrams or M-Pesa, whoever, who charge a lot of fees, and it takes time. So this way, it's immediately, instantly on their wallet, they go and use it immediately without any transaction fees as such, okay? So what is key for Africa? My view is technology is not the problem and lawyers is not the problem, okay? I'll say it again. Technologies is not the problem and lawyers are not the problem. The problem is politicians, unfortunately, who encourage some of these people for whatever reason, and we know what those are, to adopt certain people's technology rather than the other that is available. If Kenya or East Africa or Africa just put a clean set of good actors for the progress and innovation to thrive, then Africa will become a superb place. I outsource a lot of my services, especially to Nigeria and Ghana and East Africa, Kenya specifically, where people write for me or do banners or digital stuff. The world has become totally singular. It is flat now. The world is really flat. And with coronavirus, people have begun in the 3-month lockdown, learn to work and make money from home. So I don't care whether some of my people who are developing a blockchain application or a mobile app or a website or content or whatever it may be, if they are based in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, or they are based in Pakistan, India, China, Philippines, I don't care anymore. The things that I care about is who gives me the best service and who gives me the best productive systems available. So Africa's got a huge opportunity, and digital banking and the whole banking side with asset management is a $250 to $300 trillion business. This is the market cap of this. So the opportunity is huge. You need skills. Most Africans, certainly that I know, who are in tech, speak very good English. You won't find that in China, for example. Most Africans generally are very, very hardworking and want to work for their living, even if it's a small salary. So in cost effectiveness, you have an advantage as well. And the third is internet and accessibility to computing and IT and things like that. That's where you need to invest, in my view. I will end over here, but I've got lots more to add, especially on the legal side, what can happen in this coronavirus, because I'm also letsbeatcoronavirus.org founder and chairman as well. I hope that gives you a rough view of where digital banking is going.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It gives us quite some view. It would have been good for you to go into the lawyers area, but I believe
we'll do it second time. We'll do it the second session.
Yeah, the second time, yes. I think
no
the
problem.
best is to then get to Mr. Kwame to take us through the effects of the recession and whether the measures put in place by Kenya after the budget is really working, and what is in it for the legal profession. Mr. Kwame.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Kwame Wina. I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and I'm glad for this invitation to speak to you. Now, so let's start with the fact that one thing that's important for the introduction is to understand that at the beginning of the year, I'll start with Kenya and then Africa. At the beginning of the year, the growth prospects for Kenya were fairly rosy. I mean, 6.2% GDP growth, economic growth rate for the year. That was the expectation at the beginning of January. And with that kind of growth, obviously, it wasn't perfect. There was a series of other challenges that were already showing. One of them, of course, was locusts, because we are largely the desert locust invasion, because we are largely an agricultural country. Most households depend on farming. There was a fear that, of course, if that would not be controlled, then it would have knock-on effects on people's incomes and knock-on effects on livelihoods. That was a risk that was seen. The second was that the expectation that there might come rains, late or not, and that as well might affect it. So most of the risks that were seen to the Kenyan economy were risks that came from farming and the agriculture sector. Then in March, everybody had to confront the fact that, look, the coronavirus spread too, and COVID, the disease that it causes, was actually more serious than had been anticipated. The problems in Europe were showing. And in many cases, because Kenya has many connections, which is also an economic activity, globally linking to China, linking to Europe and other parts of the African continent and the world, obviously the expectation was that if this disease comes and spreads as fast as it was spreading in other parts of the world, it would be extremely damaging. A conscious decision was therefore made, which is a decision on public health grounds, which is basically to switch off the economy, which is basically to reduce interactions, meetings, to reduce transport between places, all these, and to confine people through social distancing and physical distancing. All these have the effect of slowing down the economy. So that brings me now to what the effects have been. In March, based on how serious the COVID-19 situation and emergency looked like, it became very evident that the growth prospects of 6.2% would not happen. So the central bank revised it to about 3%, and then about 3 weeks later, when it became clear that it wasn't going to pass quickly, it was revised to 2.3%. Now, the difference between 6.3% growth and 2.3% growth has significant implications rather. So starting from the part of government, if the economy is slowed down, the ability of the economy to actually create new jobs is reduced. The resources that are available for government on the one side to respond to even the health emergency itself, but at the same time to also respond to, to respond to the health emergency, but at the same time to meet general obligations of the public sector was also affected. Largely because obviously farms are not able to have their workers come in to do the work that needs to be done. There's a lot of economic activity that is more or less flattened. And because of that, the intensity of economic activity in general went down, whether in Kenya, in Nigeria, other parts of the world, it happened. And if you talk about other parts of the world, such as Nigeria, which is a country that's very highly dependent on its oil exports, the prices of petroleum went down at one point to even negative, future prices. And what this means is that government's incomes are affected. For a country that's, in which oil exports actually fund 70% of government activity, obviously that's going to be seen. And Nigeria being a big country and one that is connected substantially to its neighbors in West Africa, that meant that the growth prospects for West Africa in general went down by virtue of the fact that one big economy was affected. South Africa had the same limitation. Obviously, South Africa was going through a difficult problem as well. It was expected to grow at about 2%. The response to the crisis of, the COVID-19 emergency meant that its growth prospects have actually been cut down to half of that. So what I'm trying to show is that intensity of economic activity, whether commercial or others, was coming down. That means the market for activities and the affordability of all services, including legal services, is going to be affected. What then matters is how fast countries are able to transit from this severe period of the corona emergency to whether a recovery would be able to take place. So for instance, in Kenya, last year when the budget speech was read, there's an expectation that the total collections from taxation would be about 1.8 trillion. I think that has substantially been reduced. And when the cabinet secretary made the speech last week before parliament, it was clear that what would be collected would just be close to 1.6 trillion. So obviously that means that effect, not all of it is because of coronavirus, but definitely it shows that there's a flattening. The other thing that has shown off, has also been evident, is that because firms, whether you talk about, say, economic activities that depend on huge travel, such as tourism, global tourism, but also domestic tourism, is obviously going to be on its back for quite a while. So the business activity that might issue from that to all other sectors, whether it's the legal sector or other sectors that provide related services, is certainly going to shrink. And then with that, obviously, employment. So in the assessment of on Madaraka Day, in the assessment of the president, the president cited a publication by the National Bureau of Statistics, which shows that in those first 8 weeks alone, 300,000 jobs were lost. That's huge. That's a very, very big amount. And of course, if that momentum maintains, then obviously it might tip the country into more serious problems than was expected. So the point is, growth rates in Kenya have fallen by 1/3. We expected 6.3 at the beginning of the year. Right now, to get a point of 2.3 would be extremely impressive. But there's even a possibility that obviously, if the crisis continues, with infections continuing, and the crisis getting worse than it was, than it is right now, with more people getting affected, and the call for more resources to be spent in medical activities, then that obviously will mean that people will delay coming to work on time or actually starting business activities, because there's no one. It doesn't matter if you're a businessman and you're opening a service and nobody's coming for it. So obviously that will be a serious issue. So last week, when the cabinet secretary presented the budget speech before parliament, among the things that they talked about was an 8-point economic recovery strategy, a stimulus package. Now, the function of a stimulus is basically to say, look, in the last 3 months or so, there's been a significant shock. Many businesses have suffered. So what government is trying to do is to lift by providing a new spending, directing its spending in ways that would actually create a stimulus in other parts of the country. So, in the economy. So among the things that it did was it's trying to provide one, of course, started with a tax cut, which came early in April. And the function of a tax cut is to ensure that all workers keep a greater share of their income. So the tax cut came from 30% of income in pay as you earn, and it came down to 25. Now, what that does is it provides many people, or working people with regular salaries, with more income, because you have 5% more, you keep 5% more than you'd have kept otherwise. Now, the counter effect of that, of course, is it means that government will have less money to fund public services. So that's one that happened. The other thing is government has decided to instruct both counties and the departments of state to make payments to business people who had made supplies to the government, and to make sure that that money goes back to people, so that many more people can actually put that back into their investment and ensure that a recovery takes place, or rather to try and make sure that the recovery takes place quickly, but also that the dip does not go much further much deeper rather than was expected. So that might be helpful. One other thing about the stimulus is the government decided, in the cabinet secretary announced that there'd be refunds, VAT refunds, value-added refunds to manufacturing sector, equivalent to 10 billion. Whether that qualifies as a refund or not is doubtable. I actually think it is not, because when you pay back your debts, it does not necessarily mean that you actually added new money into the sector. What it means is that, yes, companies that were hamstrung might actually now have the opportunity to pay back, because that's money that was already, it's withheld VAT. So that's it. There are many other things that government did, which is to try as much as is possible to spread economic activity to other sectors. So for instance, government stated that it will be buying 250,000 desks, which will be distributed to schools. But if you remember that we have close to 30,000 schools, it's as if you'll have about 10 desks for each school. Not bad, but certainly not as big as was as the number suggested initially. And we come now to other sectors. Of course, as part of encouraging manufacturing domestically, one of the things that government has done as well is to say, look, we will purchase vehicles worth 600 million for vehicles that are assembled in Kenya, again trying to make farms stabilize and keep their workers going. And the growth rate in the estimation of the government would come to about 3%, perhaps even better if this season passes more quickly. But the dominant thing is that if the country is able to maintain and to slow down the rate of growth of the infections by SARS, and then prevent many more people from getting unwell so that health systems are not overwhelmed, then it is possible for people to go back to work. And if people go back to work, obviously a recovery will take place much earlier. And I think that's a common thing in most of Africa. The advantage for most of Africa is this: the rest of the world, whether it's the US and other parts of the world, Europe and big economies, are definitely going to go through a recession that might last a year and perhaps more. Now, what is a recession? A recession is just basically an economist's view of saying that over 2 quarters, say half of a year, you have growth rates falling, and in some cases going to negative, which means that the economy is actually not growing. And without growth, obviously, you can't create more incomes, you can't create more jobs. Africa has had a history since 2008 and a little earlier that recessions in Africa, even when they're global, tend not to last for long. And the second one is that in 2008, actually, many African countries did not go through a recession. The recovery in Africa was much, much faster. And if that continues to happen, then it's possible that while the growth will not be as high as was expected, we'll not be trapped in a low growth orbit, which affects the availability of services and all that. So coming to lawyers as I finish, I think what you need to look out for is growth growing in terms of, or rather, is growth taking place in terms of incomes on the other side and in terms of jobs. So if jobs recover by, say, some kind of stabilization, then it is possible that the demand for legal services throughout, whether it's people buying houses, which will take much longer, whether it's people hiring more people, which require better contracts, where firms go into contracts with each other and they continue to do the leases. So I think the biggest thing for legal professionals to watch out for is how quickly do jobs and how quickly that the growth rate recover. I think that government could have done much better in designing the stimulus program. In my view, it's very, very small, and it could have been much, much larger for the reason that the effect of the virus has been much, much more pronounced than what's assessed. And government ought to have started much, much earlier if the intent is actually to create a stimulus package. So the stimulus package that has been initiated is about 53 billion, not too much, not too little as well. But I think that if you consider that in other places, the stimulus package has been equivalent to almost 10% of GDP. In our case, it's less than 1%. So there's some space to go. And usually when you have a recession, acting early and acting with massive investment is usually a good thing to do. That has not happened, and that's a bit unfortunate. So it means that our recovery might take place, yes, but it will probably be slower than it could have been. And that affects incomes, and that affects the number of jobs that are created, which all creates a new demand for services, including legal services. Thank you very much.
insightful discussion on the economic aspect of it. There are questions which are coming up, and perhaps I would like to ask each of the speakers just to be able to identify the areas that fall under their topics for when they will be given an opportunity to answer. So thank you once again. As people say, even for lawyers, there's always a silver lining. Some people are saying perhaps that with the loss of jobs, with defaults in loan repayments, perhaps lawyers will get work because the people who have lost jobs will be coming to the lawyers to instruct them. People who have banks on their backs will be coming to lawyers. Maybe there'll be business opportunities at the same time, but then again, is it for all lawyers, and is it enough to go around? Having said that, perhaps we go to the I don't know whether we have our brother from Uganda back online. Do we have our brother, Mr. Silva, back online?
Yes, I'm back, Betty.
And you're able to take us through your topic?
Yeah, sure, I am.
Or if you are, then perhaps you could continue from where you left or just start it off again because you hadn't gone far.
Oh, no, I'm sorry that we had a connection issue. And Mr. Patel has done quite a good job in terms of elaborating what the digital banking landscape is like. The only challenge that now we are having are around issues to deal with digital access, but also digital inclusion in terms of having as many people onboarded onto the digital platforms as possible. So, but also there are certain elementary challenges that remain also in terms of our digital policy framework. I mean, we've seen a move to tax digital transactions in a manner that is eroding value in terms of both attraction to people onboarding. I mean, we have examples of the mobile money tax in Uganda, 0.5% on every transaction, cash out. But also those challenges are also coming up in Kenya now through the recent 1.5% in the tax framework. So those challenges are there, but in terms of the opportunity is that we're getting a lot of increased penetration of technology, especially driven by convergence factors. So COVID has accelerated this adoption through onboarding cashless transactions and facilitating e-commerce mostly through home delivery platforms. We're having Jumia making some traction. We are also getting a lot in terms of digital products. What I wanted to talk about mostly relates to issues around the market positioning. So much of this transactional growth, especially in digital transactions, has been mostly on the retail side of things. So we will most likely see a lot of crowdfunding as well, especially for aspects such as projects, hospitals, roads, critical infrastructure that is really needed to leapfrog the continent and the region. We are also seeing a lot of cross-border transactions and remittances. They'll most likely go down because particular around East Africa is that remittances of nationals living abroad are also going down, especially because those non-nationals, expatriates, are also using that spending now to counter the challenges of COVID that are affecting them. So that will be a lopsided. And then, of course, we cannot go without talking about the big geopolitical influence between the USA and China in terms from a digital landscape. So we're seeing a lot of a race in terms of investment in Africa, especially Huawei now, but also having other non-traditional banks, which are now called the tech fins, enter that space. For instance, we've seen a recent launch of Uber Cash, Uber launching a payment platform. We'll see Facebook payment platform. There was a huge discussion around Libra, their digital coin, which I felt probably should have been launched in East Africa because we already have established mobile money rails. We also have tested agency networks. So it's easy to distribute commissions and payments and build off what other companies like MTN and M-Pesa and Airtel have done to facilitate the real transactions. Yes, so I felt probably I could highlight more also on the non-bank aspects, which are the tech fins coming into the fintech space. Uganda during this period enacted the National Payment Systems Law and creates a regulatory framework for mobile money. One of the most revolutionary things that that law does is that it establishes a regulatory sandbox. So this will sort of be an innovation test bed where companies can go and innovate so that the market is protected against unregulated innovation with a foresight of a regulator, so that it's a balance against stifling innovation, but also enhancing consumer protection against unregulated innovation. There have also to regulate. So there have also been amendments to our Traffic and Road Safety Act to regulate digital transport service providers such as Uber and
I think we're losing the connection.
So yeah, I think that's really the future. We're building towards convergence, and COVID has given us an impetus. And lastly, in terms of the recession aspects, of course, this being Africa's first recession in 25 years, definitely there will be a lot of challenges, especially arising from national debt. We have seen.
I think we're losing his connection. So if he comes, I don't know if he's gonna fix it, or Betty, maybe you could advise us on how to proceed.
Yes, we seem to be losing it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the problem could be. Is it only on the part of Silva?
Yeah, I think it seems to only be Silva's connection. So maybe if we take questions.
Yeah, it's just his internet. You can't fix this, so just get on to the next speaker. I think it's his
it's crazy. Sorry, I mean it keeps on bouncing and
yeah, it's your internet, Silva.
Yeah, but fundamentally I'm done. So those sovereign loan issues may trigger some certain international obligations in terms of how we seek
we can't hear any of it. We cannot hear any of it.
Sorry, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. You're on and off.
Just take it to the next. Take it to the next.
Who would be
Mr. Silva? Perhaps we go to the next speaker, but meanwhile, I'd ask that we look at the questions that are going on, that are coming forth, perhaps through the chat, just to prepare yourselves for when the initial talk is over. Having lost Silva, who has anyway given us quite some insights into more of the economic world, I would ask Mr. Don to kindly come on board and discuss how law firms in Africa have been affected and what societies are doing to assist their members at this particular time.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will make some points on that, but maybe let me also just build on what Dr. Mru Patel and also Silva Kandondo Council has been telling us about digitalization, digital banking, and how that can impact us as lawyers and also as citizens, as investors. And I'd just like to take it back to the problems that he called politics, that Mru called politics, and just make this statement. The realm of digitalization and also the realm of financialization, as it is called, these are problems of international financial architecture. These are problems that require us to tackle who makes the rules under which we all operate. You've spoken about Safaricom, and the way we operate is such that every time we make a transaction on Safaricom, shareholders in UK or Vodacom, who played no part in the innovation that created Safaricom M-Pesa, are actually earning money. So who makes the rules? It is the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It is a G7, it is a G8, it is a Financial Action Task Force. Bodies in which African states and African governments have no stake. They are at best observers in the room. They are not the decision makers. They're not members of the club. This is the realm of what we call illicit financial flows. In Africa, as you know, 5 years ago, Thabo Mbeki chaired a high-level panel that came up with recommendations, which were then adopted by the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the AU, the summit, around illicit financial flows. And part of what they said is we must have democratic governmental decision-making on issues of taxation, especially digital taxation. It can't be that our colleagues make the rules, then we all have to follow, and our interests are not taken care of. Last year, Nigeria, in its presidency of the UN General Assembly, and Norway, in its presidency of the UN ECOSOC, the UN Economic, Social, and Cultural Commission, established another high-level panel, more or less the equivalent of what Mbeki did for Africa, but now for the UN. It's called UN FACTI, United Nations High-Level Panel on International Financial Accountability, Transparency, and Integrity for achieving the 2030 Agenda. So we need, as lawyers and other actors, to engage in advocacy in this space, to make sure that we're there when rules are being made, and that the rules, especially around apportionment of digitally earned income, are done very fairly so that we get our fair share. Palu has been having sessions on this, on IFFs, in virtually all of its annual conferences since 2014. And interest has been picking up amongst members. And we need much more interest, because to take on the international financial architecture and reform it is almost like trying to reform the UN Security Council. In fact, it might be easier to reform the UN Security Council than the international financial architecture, although we need to do so. So maybe in terms of, as we say, new areas of work, sovereign debt litigation. Silva mentioned sovereign debt. Sovereign debt litigation could possibly be one of our new work areas. Just the same as our colleagues, actually members of the Kisumu chapter of LSK, have recently sued the governments of the region in the East African Court of Justice with regard to Lake Victoria. So a mix of environmental litigation, but also really it's economic litigation in terms of the harm that has been done to especially businesses, but also communities and so on the Kenya side of Lake Victoria. Now, going back to the question that you asked, Chair, around how are law firms coping and lawyers coping, I'll just say that literally from when Africa's first patient zeros were declared way back in March, the whole of our society has suffered. Our clients have suffered, and as a consequence, our members who service our clients have suffered. And we have seen that whether countries have locked down or not, whether in their measures they have been strict or mild or even delinquent, their economies have suffered. And this is not surprising. Our economies are so interlinked with each other and with the globe. As colleagues in Western Kenya will tell us now, the queues of trucks waiting to cross into Uganda and into Central Africa are numbering up to 50 kilometers now. And that's just trade in goods. Trade in services has taken, of course, a huge hit. So we as PALU have been talking with our member lawyers associations at regional level, such as the East Africa Law Society, SADC lawyers, and so on, and at the national level, such as in your case, LSK and its branches. We've been comparing notes on how different people or different of our colleagues are dealing with the issues, and we've been trying to distill the good practices that can be replicated elsewhere. In general, what has come out over most of Africa and elsewhere is that of the three traditional arms of government, is the judiciary that has been most affected by the shutdowns. This is followed by the legislature, and the least closed down has been the executive, and especially the security arms of the executive, internal security, police, military, and so on. To the extent that the majority of the law firms in Africa have litigation as an important component of their practice, if not the sole component of their practice, they have been hit very hard. But even for law firms and for boutique consultancies that engage in other areas, not litigation, such as corporate law, commercial law, even arbitration, mediation, they've also been hit very hard. And this is because society has retracted, and therefore the economy has receded, and this is affecting everybody, as Kwame Owino told us. In most countries, lawyers were not designated as essential services. Legal services were not designated as essential services. Of course, in some of the countries, our colleagues at the bar have successfully undertaken litigation to change that designation. Kenya has, South Africa has. Our colleagues from the South African bar actually undertook a very successful nationwide survey of legal practitioners, which found that amongst the lawyers and law firms, 63% of them had lost more than 60% of their income during April due to the lockdown. 24.4% of the firms, of the law firms, were unable to pay any staff salaries at all. 40.3% could only pay partial salaries. And it is only 35.5% that were able to pay the full salaries of all employees. For many of the small law firms there, their clients were engaged in the type of businesses that had not been allowed to operate during the lockdown. And as such, they had shut. This can be replicated over most of Africa. Much as I'm not sure that we have completed a survey in either Kenya or Tanzania at the national level, the legal profession, the statistics coming out of South Africa can really be extrapolated. And actually they get worse in most of the continent. So in most law firms, associates and support staff were sent on leave, many of them unpaid. Very few law firms were able to just scale down and have staff working in rosters. What does this tell us? And one of our most celebrated economists, Dr. David Day, wrote about this very eloquently towards the end of April. It shows that many lawyers and many law firms are just one step ahead of our wage laborers on the vulnerability scale. Very scary. A lot of us thought we were very comfortable middle class. This has shown the opposite. We also see that firms that were already technologically oriented before found it easier to move the operations. So PALU, for instance, we're a law society, we're not a firm, but where all our programming and all our litigation was already on the cloud, it was not so hard for me to get the team to go and work from home, still be able to work collaboratively and effectively. Now, national lawyers associations and regional lawyers associations had to step in to take some measures. A lot of them came up with membership welfare schemes and funds targeting the most vulnerable of their members. A lot of these have been decentralized. So like in your case, as you say, President Mwamu, the Kisumu chapter has its own rapid response COVID-19 team and doesn't just wait for assistance or advice or ideas from Nairobi. We've also seen very many voluntary welfare schemes run by individual members. Some of the measures we've also seen is advocacy, or if necessary, litigation, to designate legal services as essential services. We have seen advocacy or litigation to get not only courts open, but also tribunals. We have lots of judicial and quasi-judicial tribunals. We have seen bar associations and law societies extending the time and the facilities for members to pay subscriptions. So deadlines have been lifted and members have been given longer time in order to fulfill their dues, bearing in mind the situation of the economy. We have seen waiver of requirements around continuing professional development and continuing legal education, especially where we have mandatory CLE. And we have seen an immense amount of online training of members through webinars and so on. As I wrap up, because I'd like the conversation to be interactive, what are the recommendations? The two key ones are to adapt and to innovate. Life will never really go back to how it used to be. That will not happen. And actually, it ought not to happen. So how do we adapt and innovate for the future as lawyers, as law firms, as legal institutions, as law societies, as bar associations? We are calling for more proactive and more dynamic bar associations and law societies at the national level, at the regional level. On the part of PAL, we'll be having in a week or so our multilingual, our first virtual full council meeting, meaning the 55 countries and the 5 regions, multilingual, online. We're calling upon lawyers and judges and magistrates and so on, and the support staff that serve as registry staff to improve their tech skills. So for instance, PALU is currently talking with Google to pilot a training of lawyers in basic ICT skills. And we see how that can be rolled out and how that can be replicated. So colleagues who didn't really need this before can easily and nimbly be trained in ways that they understand, bearing in mind that a lot of us are not very mathematical or very scientific in terms of, the hard science skills, physics, statistics, and so on. We're pushing courts and tribunals to go online. So for instance, the East African Court of Justice has been very successfully online for now, over a month. They started around May 15th. Today we're on June 15th. We're pushing the African Court on Human and People's Rights to do the same. They're holding a virtual session now with the judges deliberating from their various locales. But we're actually pushing them that they should hear us in their current session, which is running from 1st to 26th June, on an urgent request for an advisory opinion on a COVID-19 related issue that we filed 2 weeks ago. And we're pushing national courts and tribunals to do the same. And the key thing we're pushing, especially at the national level, is decentralization. So the Judicial Service Commission, the National Council on Administration of Justice in Nairobi, the Chief Justice as the President of the courts in Kenya, can make guidelines, can issue practice guides and so on from Nairobi to cover the entire country of Kenya, for instance. But there's a lot also to be said by decentralization, allowing the judge in charge of the Kisumu station to engage the legal practitioners in Kisumu to look at their context and to allow for local innovation and local contextualization. So in some areas, they may choose to use Skype, in others, Zoom, in others, Microsoft Teams, in others, Blue Jeans, and so on. So do what works for you with your bar bench committee at the local level. We will see then that some will move faster than others and provide a model for others. We're also encouraging lawyers to do more pro bono, including on civil law issues, including from the comfort of their homes or their neighborhoods. All in all, we're saying, let's think out of the box. Let's consider now, especially when there's reduced courtroom activity and reduced numbers of people who can be in the courts at any one time, let's seriously consider 24-hour courts. Let's seriously consider a situation where the registries are open 24 hours with staff working in shifts, dealing with lawyers and law firm staff in shifts over 24 hours. Let's think of the judges and magistrates sitting in shifts over 24 hours. Night court should not just be a soap opera on TV. It can be our new reality. We're encouraging lawyers and law firms to multitask and diversify. Some rules and Silva's suggestion about targeted investment in digital currency or in the digital realm as an area of legal practice, but also as an area of investment is there. We're encouraging lawyers to invest in agriculture, do your small farm, agricultural farm by the side, enter catering, hospitality, and so on to augment your own personal and family income. We're also encouraging innovation within our circles. Lawyers have very many savings and credit cooperatives. How can these be used as hubs for innovation of things we could do? I'm encouraging for us to have tiger teams within the circles, for instance, already investigating for us this digitalization field. Legal hackathons, such as the ones that Lawyers Hub and Linda Bonyo have been doing since April, can help us working voluntarily to formulate draft laws, draft rules, draft regulations, draft guidelines that might be needed in this area, whether it's 24-hour courts and so on. I also finally really encourage multi-stakeholder consultations between legal professionals and other professionals. We should be forming consortia, we should be forming coalitions, we should be working with bankers, business people, doctors, economists, scientists, especially research scientists, scholars, and so on, so that together we come up with comprehensive theories, comprehensive strategies around how to rejig our economies. So bodies like the Association of Professional Societies in East Africa, APSEA, should be very active now, and the Law Society representatives in APSEA should be very active, talking with our colleagues to see how our economies can be opened, can be rejigged, can be reformulated. So let me stop there for now. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, which from what I can see will enable us to come up with recommendations going forward, and which we can push for, like the issue of working in shifts and even during weekends. We are going to go into the question session. I will ask Linda to prepare to take us through the questions that have come forth under the Q&A area, and even to pick some from the chat. But just to start us off, perhaps I could lay some ground for some of our panelists. I would like to know from Mr. Kwame what the landscape is likely to look like. You know, we are saying COVID, people are reopening. The courts are open today, by the way. But there's a lot of apprehension. What would you advise that one takes investments in? In which area should one invest, or should one invest at all at this particular time when the economy is threatened? And when, as you say, or as they say, we are in some sort of a recession, is this the time to invest in any area? Mr. Patel and perhaps Mr. Silva, we have very many pre-millennial generation, people who belong to that generation, for whom cryptocurrency is just, you know, very strange, very vague. It sounds complicated. How can they be roped in? How can they be roped in? The other issue, of course, which I think is maybe in the questions, is the issue of security. When we are talking about the digital world, whether in the court process or in the banking area, there's fear about hacking, about exposure of whatever information is out there. Is it, how do we cushion ourselves against that? I think I would leave it at that for now, but ask Linda also to perhaps come up with other areas that have been shared and targeted at specific panelists so that they can give us more insight into these areas. Many thanks to all of you for now.
Shall I kick off, Betty? Shall I?
Yeah, you could take those before we just address the rest of the questions.
Okay, let's do that. So first of all, Don, it's very rare for me to say this, but to find a future-looking, thinking lawyer, fantastic. So I'd like talk to be converted into actions, okay? I like your thinking because I talk about this for the last 20 years, okay, in the vision stuff that I do. So I have a lot of ideas, and including you should put in your hackathons why smart contracts as, you know, as a subject cannot be done through these hackathons, because lawyers, whether you like to accept it or not, your jobs, and for that matter, most jobs are threatened through this disruption. So why should I care that my lawyer has a smart contract template from Tanzania or Kenya or Uganda than he has from America? As long as you abide some basic transactional law practices, you know, how A and B transact, and there are only a few amounts. But if you look at the real estate side, there cannot be more than 250 different types of core blueprint legal terms. So I like this 24-hour working. I like these hackathons. If you want my help, by all means, reach out and I will help you with all of those things. I have a whole raft of not only experience, but people that I can reach out to as I speak around the world. I must have seen over 1,000 proposals in the last year talking about your investment question, and I can advise as well, but it's not financial advice on where people should invest and how they should invest. So let's take the question I think Tom Dallo mentioned in there, is what governments are doing or not doing in certain countries. And the whole discussion is about what Betty also said. I'll try and bring it together of why millennials or even new guys are kind of like worried about the cryptocurrency. Let me tell you, I don't think it's the young people who are worried about it. It's more the older generation who are worried about this, first and foremost, okay? So the younger generation want own freedom. They want decentralization. And what Don also said, a lot of it applies to the younger generation and the millennials. And if you may, let me share this screen with you on where I think is going, and I'll bring it down to how I see this whole cryptocurrency, blockchain, and everything will take on. So if the host can allow me to share, I will jump in and share a screen, which is quite insightful. So the question from Tom was about central bank digital currency. My view, and by the way, I will give a shout out. I'm talking to Mandla Mandela. You know, if Nelson Mandela was there just now, a lot of this, what I call not doing the right ethical things, wouldn't happen. So people are worried just now where, you know, who's going to cheat who. Don also mentioned that it's not politics that comes in the way for some of these bad actors to come in and, I call, rape the African community for huge transaction fees. It's true, the rape can happen from outside, but someone in the country is allowing it. You know, you guys, you need your fair share of the cut of profits. If the transaction's done on your land, you need a slice of it to function in the government. Please don't allow it. Don't allow anybody to do that. So central digital currency, banking currency that China is trialing out, and I was in China last November speaking at an event, and I met with some people out there in the government and a few other people, and we were talking about this. So it's absolutely the way to go. Why? Because if you think about it, 7 trillion of US dollars gets transacted on a daily basis. That's a huge amount. Now imagine just the exchange rate, even if it's 1 cent, how much people are making, okay? Now imagine who is controlling this, okay? Now imagine if you were China or country in Africa or Europe, you must think, hang on, why are we just transacting in this manner and paying all these other middlemen to do transactions? So what's happened, and by the way, it takes time, and we all know banks make money on your banks whilst it's in limbo, doing the transaction, correspondence bank jumping, okay? So what is happening is China, Germany, UK, and America, and quite a lot of people have realized that, you know, we can't beat this cryptocurrency movement, for want of a better word, but it's become such a revolution that if they don't take part of it, currency will be, as we know it, fiat will disappear, okay? If you think just a few centuries ago, there was no paper money, okay? We were trading in traditional ways. We give you wheat, corn, some mineral or whatever, and there was bartering. Then money got formed. It's now a new transformation with digital currency, because if you just look at even the example of what's happening in America, where they're trying to pay off people for helping them during the COVID-19 scenario, they cannot transact it as fast. So if it was digital currency, it's immediately on their wallet, press of a button and it's done. You don't have to worry about all the lobbyists controlling money, the central banks, the treasuries, the De La Rues of the world who actually print this money. So all these people lobby governments and central banks and treasuries around the world in their own way. So cryptocurrency is not allowed to go in because their jobs are at threat. End of story. That's why CBDC has taken that much longer to be accommodated, because you get all these blockers from banks to printing money companies to all sorts of people saying, no good, security, this, that, and the other. Let me tell you, it's more secure than fiat money. There's more money laundering happening with the dollar than there is with cryptocurrency, okay? A lot more, 1,000 times more when I last looked at it. However, there is one point on security. Exchanges and infrastructures do get attacked. Like most banks, like most credit card frauds, etc., etc. So what people are doing now, and ourselves included, we've got biometrics way of doing it, voice, and several other technologies being used, AI, ML, and all these technologies being used where people can be tracked and traced. The advantage of blockchain is once the transaction's on the blockchain, it cannot be rubbed off. It is there forever. Okay, so if you're a land registry for title deeds transactions, right the way through to a legal case, it is there, it's written. You can follow the history of it, you can follow all parts of it. So this has to be adopted to go forward. Let me share with you.
Dr. Peru, thank you very much. I think we'd allow Kwame to make his remarks at this time.
Oh, yes, let's have Don to say something. Let me share this 2 seconds, because this is where I think Africa should go to, okay? Sure, we've seen the evolution of where people are going, yeah, from the past in technology. But the next world is all around here, using nanochips, quantum computing, AI, ML. So whether you are a law firm or any e-commerce business, if you don't take these technologies into your business, you will find you will struggle. Okay? So open it up for others.
Thank you so much. Kwame, if you could unmute your mic and just respond to the comments raised by Betty.
Okay, so I think, thanks a lot. So Betty asked just one question, which is, what advice would I give? Okay, let me start with you saying that, look, I'm not an investment advisor, but I think what I say here is something that you need to, yes, 2 things could be important. Economists and business people, and I think as lawyers as well, you know that cash is king. And I mean, notwithstanding the fact that we've had cash, whether it's in cryptocurrency or whether it's in hard cash, I mean, it's king, or whether it's in your wallet, M-Pesa wallet, it's king, because it allows you to buy things. It gives you purchasing power that's very, very real. So right now, because we're not too sure how deep it will be, how deep the coronavirus or the COVID-19 emergency will be, many people are trying as much as possible to limit cash transactions, which means spending and making commitments that might turn because of the uncertainty over time. So I think the first thing you can do is, if you have some cash, it does not harm to preserve it for a while. However, if it's cash that you can actually, you think you might not need immediately, and you need over 1, maybe another year, because in another year, everything will be clearer, whether we have a vaccine or not, then what you can do is actually, this is the moment to think about what kind of markets and what kind of investments you might go to. Why? Because yes, in relative terms, in the US it's a little different, but in relative terms, stocks are fairly cheap. There are also other businesses that actually are now opening up, but also government paper. So for instance, the safest kind of investment in the world tends to be government paper. Bonds are okay. Government bonds are about 7%, I think. 7 or 8%. 7 or 8% is not bad. Even if our inflation is 3, you get 4%, which is not, and you have nothing to worry about. So the point is, if you can keep the cash, keep it. If you want, that gives you liquidity. If you want something that's less liquid, but also available and safe, definitely you can go for public bonds, government bonds, which you can buy through your bank. And the final one is, if this is cash that you have and you can keep it over the long term, then obviously you can ask your investment advisor to buy off the securities exchange. And the good thing about this is, if you're Kenyan, you don't just have to buy it in Kenya. You can open an account and somebody can buy for you wherever it is that you want to do. So that's my advice. But I think coming back down to, because I know I'm speaking to lawyers, I think it's something for the law society to consider, and lawyers in general to consider, that good running of the economy is useful for the expansion of economic activity, which in turn expands your prospects as lawyers as well. So it's true that right now there might be a fire sale on mortgages and all that, but as Betty mentioned, that's a very niche market. So you probably will have only 5 or 6 big law firms in every city doing that, and then the rest is not available. So therefore, spreading economic activity through all the firms and raising competition is something that is dependent on how well the overall economy does. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. And I think this time I'll just, before I raise the questions, I'll echo some comments and sentiments that were mentioned by Don. And the statistics that he gave from South Africa are just the same statistics that lawyers have found when they released a justice sector survey in terms of the areas of practice that have been affected by COVID-19 and their reactions. And so at this point, I'd like to invite you after this call to just have a look at our YouTube page. You can find 48 sessions that we held at the Africa Law Tech Festival that sort of explore these new areas of practice that you could identify, including teaching lawyers how to code and how to gain technical expertise. So it's just something I want to bring to your attention. So now we move on to the questions that have been raised. And the first question that I'm going to respond to is one from Norman Kimboy, who says that, my name is Norman and I am the CEO at Ajiri Fintech, a professional service deployment company committed in connecting skilled professionals to part-time jobs. We would like to work with the LSK and the law firms that work under in streamlining lawyer-client communications or coming up with online-based paralegal. And given that we are a local freelance company, our professionals are part-time. So I think he's just bringing to your attention some of the solutions that he could be giving. I think I would ask.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think he's just raising his solutions and how we would want to partner with you. And I think maybe at the end you can comment on that. But I'll just move on to the next question from Pat, who says, what is the spend on infrastructure in East Africa to allow the digital economy to thrive? And who is spending, government or private companies, or both? We are witnessing this, and how difficult, So what is the spend on infrastructure in East Africa to allow the economy to thrive? And I'll invite Kwame to answer this question.
I think the problem for East Africa regarding, if we talk about especially infrastructure that enables the digital economy to thrive rather, the problem in East Africa is not infrastructure. The problem in East Africa is the absence of competition. So for instance, if you look at Kenya over the last few months, and when it became clear that all of us cannot meet in a room and have a discussion of 50 people or 119, as I can see in this, in our forum today, in our webinar today, the problem has been the quality of infrastructure. So as we can tell, and I say this with respect, our colleague from Uganda has had a couple of problems in here. So Africa, even with that existence of broadband available and all that, so first it's expensive in relative terms. It's very, very expensive even by global standards. And then the quality of the regulation to ensure that the service quality is good. And then the complementary side is electricity. So for me, for instance, working at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we try to put down you're an association as well, when we try to put on webinars every day, and the context, or rather the feedback that we get from all members is how they missed some part of it because either power went off or their service provider did. So the quality of service is it. And I think that's something as well for lawyers to think about. I mean, regulation and lawyers who work in regulation, what can be done here, or consumer affairs and stuff like that. So my view is that it's not an infrastructure problem, actually. If you look at Kenya, Kenya has 4 big broadband submarine cables. And they're all here. The amount of internet that is consumed is much, much less. I think it's less than 30% of what the total is. The problem is who's providing you with service and what's the quality of that service, and how do you make sure that the regulators, such as the Communications Authority, which is more interested in regulating how we send political opinion across social media than actually the quality of service that people receive. So they have their eyes on the wrong side, and these people need to be brought back to actually understand how they frustrate economic activity by the quality of service that is provided. All internet service providers, and I'm working from my office partly because the connection I have at home is supposed to be one of the best, but it's completely unreliable. So when I work at the office, at least we have 2 redundancy lines, which means that if one gets cut, we go to the other. But people cannot work like that by paying 3 times more than you need just to make sure that you can have a smooth. So the problem, actually, speaking to lawyers, I don't think the problem is capacity, because we determine that capacity. There's a lot of it. The problem is actually the quality of service, which means competition is not sufficient or the regulation is not happening well. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd like us to answer a question raised by Grace, who says, how has the growth of mobile transactions and mobile banking been affected by data privacy laws? What should one look out for in the process of negotiating contracts for data storage and online payments? And so I'm not sure if Silva has a strong connection to be able to answer this question. I just like to pose a question to him.
Yes, I think I have a better connection now.
That's encouraging.
No, I do. The interesting thing is that I paid for 4G, and I think what I'm getting right now is 2G. But anyway, so I really think data protection and privacy are very key. In Uganda, we already have the Data Protection and Privacy Act that was passed last year. The implementation is still ongoing. We've of course heard quite a lot about the Huduma bill in Kenya and the court challenges and what has happened. Now, the key things you need to look out for is that under the general data protection and privacy requirements, it sets different obligations for different players. So the law generally characterizes entities as data collectors or data processors or data externalization agents. I mean, here you're looking at entities that are engaging in cross-border transfers of data and data centers. So if you're in that category of cross-border payments, especially like cross-border data transfers, especially if you're dealing with the European Union citizens' data, then the European Union General Data Protection Law is going to apply, regulation rather, is going to apply to you. So the key things you need to look at is A, how will the data be collected? What's the data collection model? How will it be kept? What's the duration under which it will be kept? Who will be the people who have access to that data as it's being kept by the data controller? What recourse mechanisms will you have in case such data is compromised? Will there be aspects, say, of data insurance? How will it be destroyed when the period of its holding lapse?
Okay, thank you. So thank you. We'll ask,
and of course, the very essential.
We'll ask Don to answer this question that has been raised.
Issue is consent. How are the data owners for you?
I think he hasn't finished.
Oh, sorry. I think the problem is we can't really hear him very well. So we'll just ask Don to answer one of the questions that has been raised by our attendees, which is, how do you feel about the Tanzanian president's decision to remain open for business during COVID-19? How will this affect the balance of power in East Africa over the long term?
I think it is within each country's sovereign right to make a decision on how it will deal with the problem of COVID-19. And we've seen many states took the principle of the strategy of flattening the curve and therefore put in very robust measures. Other states, not just Tanzania, eventually ended up with the herd immunity strategy or some mishmash, of the two. So I think it is the right. A question will be asked on whether that was a decision of the country, therefore a shared decision between the major stakeholders of the country, or that was a decision of one person or a minority, which then raises issues over whether the legitimacy of the decision or its credibility. The problem with Tanzania was that in the beginning, it was not very clear what strategy they were adopting. So we were having talking heads. So the Minister for Health, Umi Mwalimu, who's actually a lawyer, but a very, very good public official, was very, very proficient, very consistent, giving statistics and so on of what's going on in the country and giving recommendations along the lines of physical distancing and enhanced hygiene. But we'd see the head of state and some of the regional commissioners by their actions doing different, walking around in markets, addressing people in packed churches and mosques, having tea with people under a tree, which then projected the image that was the opposite of what the minister was saying. Luckily, in the recent past, in the last several weeks, I think the head of state has been much more clear. So we may disagree with their strategy, but at least now we know what it is. Now, what does that portend for regional collaboration, cooperation, integration? That act by itself for me would not disturb me. The problem we have is that our governments have refused to formally meet as the East African community from as far back as November last year. The scheduled summit of the EAC is held on 30th November. The Burundi government said we couldn't make it and didn't turn up and there was no quorum and they couldn't meet. After COVID has started, ECOWAS, I think, has met at least 3 times virtually at the level of heads of state. IGAD has met at least twice. SADC has not, because some states refused to meet. In the end, Cyril Ramaphosa called what he called a consultative meeting. So we may not meet the formal quorum requirements, but those who are willing to meet, let them meet. A month ago, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan did the same, because 2 of the states have refused to meet. As a consequence, they are not able to use the proper organs of the community, the Sectoral Committee on Health, to come up with a shared harmonized response, which then the Sectoral Committee on Transport and Trade and so on can use to come up with regional harmonized guidelines that have the force of law. That is why we have huge backlogs of goods caught rotting at borders, on the Kenya-Tanzania borders and so on. So really what we need to do as lawyers is push within the laws of the East African Community Treaty to force our leaders to meet and the various sectoral councils to meet so we can come up with a harmonized approach. Thank you.
Thank you. While we're still on you, Dawn, there is a question that has been raised on the use of courts, the 24-hour use of courts. And so he says, which country has, the questioner asked, or the person raising the question asked, which country has implemented the 24-hour use of courts, and how practical is it, considering most African countries are not operating on a 24-hour economy? So I'd just like you to respond to that, and to respond also to a question raised by Caroline, who says, what is the holding of the judiciary in using technology-based or using tech evidence, and raises a few comments on the use of the environment and agricultural litigation remains a rich practice area, but this will not work without an easy roadmap for the enforcement of court orders. So using the digital network to attach property and cash. So because these are avenues that you have raised for alternative practice, I'd just like you to respond to that before we move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the ones from Carol Kasoa were actually more of recommendations, which I agree and I accept and adopt wholly. They were not so much a question. I agree with that we can have courts be more proactive in terms of evidence collection methods, in terms of digital collection of evidence, including, as she says, being able to use maps, satellite maps and so on in terms of delineation of boundary disputes. I agree with that. And for me, especially because of that, is why I'm talking, and also in answer to the other question around the 24-hour courts, is why for me, I'm proposing decentralization also and allowing room for local innovation. As far as I know, I have not come across, as of the moment, any African country that's already adopted a 24-hour court kind of system as a standard system. We do know, though, that for matters of urgency, you can approach a judicial officer, even in his or her home at any hour of the day or night, and they are able to issue urgent provisional orders, even handwritten when they're wearing their pajamas and bathrobes. We do know that. But what is stopping us from going 24 hours is actually our minds. It is just our minds. And that's why I'm saying, let's decentralize. If the guys in Malindi are willing to do it, and there's been a discussion between the two sitting judges and the lawyers, and the judges have said, okay, we'll sit in shift and we'll deal with you in shift, it is doable. If they've persuaded the registry staff that rather than stay home and not be jobless, work in 8-hour rosters and be able to accept filings and filing fees and so on, it is doable. And the moment people begin doing it, what the young people call FOMO, the fear of missing out, will make others, begin thinking of doing it. So it is actually quite doable, and much as it's not standard done anywhere in Africa as of now that I know of, I am actually recommending it across many places. And in places like South Africa also, we're beginning to get some traction with it. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you. I saw there was a question also from Charles Kamala regarding the request for advisory opinion on COVID-19. I could answer it now, or Chair, you can tell me, when you'd like me to.
I think you could answer it. Kindly proceed and answer it. Kindly proceed and answer it.
Okay, Chair. So 2 weeks ago, Palu filed an urgent request for an advisory opinion from the African Court on Human and People's Rights on effective guarantees for the right to participate in government in your country during COVID-19. So Charles, the first thing, it was not a contentious case under Article 4 of the protocol. It was a request for an advisory opinion. The article authorizes member states, organs and institutions of the AU, and also African organizations recognized by the AU to file requests for advisory opinions. PALU is one such body, as we have a formal MOU with the AU. The request is non-confrontational, rather than a case which would have been adversarial. And we're seeking an opinion from the court, and the opinion will still be influential because it will restate what is the law of the AU that is applicable in all the 55 African states. We did not seek an injunction to stop any elections. We appreciated that the decision whether to hold elections and when to hold elections is within the sovereign right of each country. We essentially have asked the court 3 questions. If a state decides to hold elections during COVID-19 and with the risks that come with it, what should be the standards and guidelines for that election to be termed free, fair, inclusive, participatory? On the other hand, if a state decides to postpone elections, what should be the standards and guidelines for this postponement? And also the process. The process of deciding to postpone elections cannot be decided by the chief executive himself, as we've seen some trying to do, for instance, in Malawi. It cannot be decided by the political parties themselves. This is a huge decision that requires the country. So what should be the process for holding national consultations that are seen to be inclusive and participatory to decide whether or not to hold elections, when to hold elections, to ensure that the people are represented? So those are the questions that we've asked from the court. We want clear guidance interpreting the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, Article 13, that provides for the right to government in your country, interpreting the Maputo Protocol, which is the rights of women with regards to the governance of their country and elections in their countries, and the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, which sets very robust standards about that. So this is just one of the legal and constitutional issues coming up in the context of COVID-19, for which we lawyers are supposed to push for there to be clear rule of law ways of dealing with it. Thank you.
Linda, do we have any other question on the Q&A? Hello, Linda.
To answer it. And the question says, working in a tech, I have seen many initiatives and recommendations. So the question says, working in a tech firm and an IT vendor, I have seen many initiatives and recommendations in the law industry, but firms and societies make little effort in making these fundamental shifts. How best can technology improve a reserved sector? And I think Dr. Patel is well-versed to answer, seeing as he's giving many solutions to digital financing and all this. So maybe if you could answer this question for us as we close.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. So, you know, I'll come back to Don. He said something very important. Solutions are only in your mind. You know, what you need to think about first and foremost is there is no box. So think about, you know, within the box and the sky is the limit. There is no sky and there is no box. Start like that. Otherwise, you will not disrupt. Okay. And when you are into innovation rather than playing what I call catch up all the time, you will not progress because the Western world will really blow it away. Something Don mentioned as well, I want to expand on that. Okay. In terms of technical solutions, you know, there are so many things, even in the legal profession. Why can law firms in Africa, and you know, a lot of the people have said there's a recession and it's going to get worse in my view. Why can't law firms working 24/7 supply legal cases, at least at the first stage, before it goes up the escalation ladder through Supreme Courts and High Courts, etc. Okay, so why can you not do virtual courts from Africa for around the world? All right, this is possible nowadays. There are solutions that allow you to do that. Same thing with, why can't people in Africa actually provide any form of service that is required in technology? I pointed out in my last slide, the whole thing about AI, ML, deep learning, sensitivity analysis, graphical analysis, chart analysis. These are all jobs that can be done remotely. Believe me, big data, AI is huge. So all those solutions can be done in Africa. The law should not interfere with innovation, you know, and I covered this before as well. Where the law or the local law tries to interfere and stifle progress, there will be a revolution. That's why there's decentralization, and there's a lot of talk about decentralization. That's why cryptocurrency came into being. So no matter what kind of product or service business you are, a lot of this can be done using new technologies. I'll give you another classic. Advising a company for cars and AI-based tracking of preventative maintenance, okay? So why should I not have a mobile phone and in here I can see that the light is on or the engine management system's off or tire pressure or my next service is on, etc., etc. Why can all this not be on the blockchain? There are parts of this solution already available, but on a car, you have this thing called the onboard diagnostic port underneath the steering generally or wherever. So whenever you take your car in for service, who wants to sit around drinking dare I say, shit coffee in a lot of these reception areas, waiting for them to say, oh, we think this is wrong, bring it back next week, or wait for 3 hours. No, those days are gone. People are not patient. They would rather say, oh, I think this is wrong. And the engineer remotely looks into your diagnostics through the internet, 5G, 4G, and says,
is there a problem with connection?
Sorry, mine is okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah. So why can the mechanic not on board diagnose your solution and even say, come to the garage or let me reset it? So the world is going that way. So now why can't these centers be in Africa? So coming back to technology solutions, these solutions can be anywhere in the world. That's why Don, you, me, and Kwame, and a few other people here, I would like us to create a group to say, let's look for solutions, how to explore in Africa. You know, that's my thing, because otherwise we can all sit here and talk and dream and have visions, but we need to create some sort of working group to say, we will champion some of these and take 2 or 3 of these and make it happen, you know. And to raise funds on these things is not difficult in this climate. Believe me, Africa is one of the biggest markets that the world is looking at because it has vast resources, a lot of intellect, a lot of hardworking people to build these solutions. So it's just someone to point you in and say, this is a solution, there's a solution, let's do this. I hope that answers it. If not, then just point me what I haven't covered. Thank you.
I think that covers it. And even as we look to increasing technical expertise and adopting new ways of, you know, just moving with technology in terms of AI, machine learning, and cloud computing, as you had mentioned, someone has raised a question and they've said the judiciary doesn't have these experts, and so probably they're in the private sector, and there needs to be, like you have said, a way of coming together so that we can improve capacity. And even at this time, when we held a webinar previously, the judiciary did come and say they solicited help from the Ministry of ICT to be able to just give interim interventions. And so at this time, having answered our questions, I would just like to hand it over to Betty and James so that they would just allow you to make closing remarks. And I hope we can conclude this in the next few minutes so that I'll just give it back to them to allow you to make closing remarks and just make any comments. And I can see we have a new panelist, Joanne. And so I'll just invite Betty to come up and ask this panelist to make the closing remarks.
Thank you very much for that. And so far, so good. Before I do that, there was the question about the cross-border trade issue, the effect of Tanzania not embracing the lockdown. And of course, we have the issue of the truck drivers who are several kilometers delay, several days with goods on transit, not being transited. That question was answered to some extent by Mr. Don, but I would like to ask Mr. Kwame, even as he wraps it up for us, what effect it would have on the economy, as it were, Kenya and the other. And again, what we are seeing about the other day, fuel prices were very low. Recently now they have gone up. Petrol is now up, many shillings up. What is the effect of that, especially coming against the backdrop of the pandemic? Maybe you could consider answering that as we are going to the last lap and giving you chances to round up. Perhaps Mr. Kwame could start, answer those, and then round it up. And I don't know whether Mr. Mwamu has anything else that he wants to add before you begin. Sorry, we have, you have also talked about Joan. Joan is the chair of the Kisumu chapter who has just joined us. We are lucky to have her, and she will be giving her remarks and giving a vote of thanks on behalf of all of us.
Okay, fine. So I think I'll answer. I agree as well. I think one of the things that the African continent is known for is for every country to assert its sovereignty. Unfortunately, we only try to assert sovereignty when we are dealing with the institutions of outside Africa, and we get very surprised when an African country, say Tanzania or Kenya, decides to take a different policy posture regarding how to manage COVID. I think, as Don said, sovereignty and a country is entirely entitled to take its own decisions here. It would be good if it would be coordinated, but that, in my view, reflects the failure of diplomacy within the East African community. It would be perfect if we could all agree to similar procedures, standardized testing, and stuff like that. So I have no problem at all with Tanzania deciding, look, we are responsible for our citizens' health. We have analyzed this position, and in our view, we will not go for the lockdown, because there are people who actually question the value of the lockdown. I don't, but there are people who question. And if in Tanzania they reach a different, they reach an alternative conclusion, I think we ought to respect that. So I actually accept that they have that's entirely within the right of Tanzanian public sector professionals to make that decision and be accountable to its people. What were some of the effects? Of course, we saw some of those effects that even for far-friendlier countries such as Kenya and Uganda, we've had problems with truck drivers moving and whether they've been tested or not, and whether that test comes in quickly enough. Which suggests to me that one of the things that will be necessary for this economy to recover quickly, and I think for all African economies, would be how quickly are we able to conduct tests to determine whether people are unwell or not, and whether they can cross from one border to the other. If you look at Kenya's case, we are testing about 1,000 people per day, maybe less than 2,000 people per day. And given how quickly this virus spreads, I think we need to step up that. It's an East African problem as well. So if you think that Rwanda has 1/4 of Kenya's population, but is testing twice as many people as we are, so obviously they have a far better handle of how the spread of the virus is going on. So there's some cutting up that each of the countries, Uganda, Tanzania, but more specifically Kenya and Tanzania, need to do to be able to do that. But as I conclude, as lawyers, you must remember that the legal economy is a part of the larger Kenyan economy. So whatever value you can create is dependent on other transactions that take place. If people are buying houses, of course, the real estate lawyers will have some business to do, adding value, of course, to the process. If transactions are taking place, employment grows, obviously employment rolls. If people need arbitration over contracts, that will happen, and that will be. So what you need to see is that the legal sector is itself embedded in the national context and also the global context. So as firms grow and as growth takes place, it's in the interest of lawyers to actually see that before we can actually have be on the back end of providing solutions for people to employ their workers, or to manage separation or to manage mergers. All that depends on the health of the economy. And so looking at some of the decisions that the public sector makes regarding debt, regarding how contracting takes place, regarding expenditure one way or the other, whether some of it is wasteful or not, all these things are governed by laws. And I'd like to see a cadre emerge within, for instance, law societies among legal professionals, of people whose work is actually to monitor public finance law, and whether, whenever possible, to intervene in those areas to ensure that the laws respect constitutional edicts, and at the same time are implemented in a way that respects not only the constitutional edicts, but also generate greater public value, because the legal profession is actually a public profession in the sense that work takes place within largely in the public sphere. So that's my conclusion. Thank you very much.
For that wonderful wrap up. I had asked whether Mr. Mwamu has any area of concern before the other panelists wrap up. Perhaps he has. If he doesn't, then we'll be going to Mr. Patel for the wrap up.
I just want to thank all the panelists for the good presentations that they have done. They have covered a lot of areas. And we're just very grateful that we will, next time, perhaps we'll call you to break this down for us. Finding new opportunities, in the digital area, in the world. I think lawyers realizing that there's a need to diversify. And perhaps this is one way to go. And I think Don has captured to say that things are not going back to normal. I mean, we are not going to go back normally 100%. This thing has changed, and I think it has changed for good. So it's just good for us as lawyers, as businessmen, to be able to diversify, and as Silva Kayondo said, to innovate within this very difficult time. We have also, Kwame has also pointed out how technology is still very expensive. Even for lawyers, investing in technology is not an easy thing. And this thing has affected not just the small law firms, but also the big law firms have been affected adversely. At least South Africa, as Don has pointed out, has taken an opportunity to do a survey on how this has affected the law firms that have completely closed, ones that send their employees on leave without pay, ones that are paying their employees half salary, 3/4, or no salary at all. So these are things that affect us as human beings and as lawyers, as professionals. And then also the other issue that as lawyers, perhaps we need to see how you can work with other professionals, accountants, engineers. How can we build a professional hub? East African Business Community of Business Council. How can we then do this? And that has been well captured. I would have wanted to say more, but they have been very illuminating. Thank you very much, Dr. Amru Patel. It was always good to hear you talking about the chains and the crypto, those things that unlike the formal banking. And so thank you very much from me. Thank you very much, and God bless you. I think I'll hand you over back to Beatty.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and Mr. President, as we call you on other angles. From Jacqueline, she says quite illuminating. That's Jacqueline Wahinya. Peter Bore, insightful. And with the chairman having said what he has said, I would ask Mr. Don Dare perhaps to give his closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I'll try and keep it brief, and I'll just address two issues, especially I think the comments or questions that came from Norman Kemboi, Barbara Kiley, and also the recommendation from Michael Wiso around can we use legal interns if we're to go 24-hour. I'll just reiterate what I said in the group. As far as I know now, in many countries, and I think also in Kenya, especially after the reports came from the Ministry of Health with the recommendation for each of our courts. Courts are operating with reduced staff. So maybe you've got 1/3 of the staff coming in today, another third coming in tomorrow, or so on and so on. So rather than have 1/3 coming in every day, in my view, we can have 1/3 coming in every 8 hours. So then that becomes the shift. And you can even make it voluntary in the beginning. Let those who are willing and able be the ones to start. That's why for me, I'm calling for decentralization and local innovation. On the question of the EAC, I'll just say one thing. Meetings of organs of the EAC are a treaty requirement, and it is not discretionary. It is not at the whim of each leader. The Summit of Heads of State is an EAC organ. The Council of Ministers is an EAC organ. The sectoral councils for health, for transport, for trade, these are EAC organs. They are required by the treaty to meet and deliberate. Harmonized standards and harmonized approaches are a treaty requirement. They are not a favor. So at the moment, we're engaging the East African Legislative Assembly to see if there are non-litigious ways of getting these people to meet. Or if not, we will sue them in the East African Court of Justice for violating treaty requirements. On innovations generally, and again, I think this was a point that was made by one of the people that why aren't lawyers and the private sector innovating and influencing the judiciary? I would say some innovations are happening. Within law firms, within legal enterprises, innovations are happening. In fact, the mistake we are making is that we are not highlighting them enough in our spaces so that they can provide a model for the rest of us to be inspired to follow. And I've got a way forward on that. Let me give you an example. I've kept on repeating, Linda Bonyo and her team, and Linda is a member of the Palu ICT Law Committee, by the way. We have, I think, 3 Kenyan members on the ICT Law Committee who also help push us, give us advice and ideas. Linda and her team and the Africa Law Tech Association have come up with the legal hackathons. So now when we're recommending something to the government, we can go on our own. In 48 hours, working voluntarily for free from the safety of the comfort of our houses, come up with a comprehensive bill on almost anything under the sun. So that when we go to approach the Chief Justice or the Attorney General or Parliament, we're giving them recommendations, and attached to them is a well-written bill that has been contributed by many people. That's innovation. I would say, finally ending, and that's part of the challenge that we're dealing with in Palu now. How do we make prominent good practice being done by our members across the continent, and how do we get members working more together? So we've been working on a new membership engagement system, a new platform, which will be ready hopefully by the end of this month, if not by early next month, where you can do all your membership things on your phone or on your tablet or on your computer as you choose. You know, you can go to our website, you can find out more details about us. You realize that we encourage members to join and then to work in committees, finance law committee, digital law committee, cryptocurrency working group, you know, family law group, you know, whatever it is that you want to do. And you're able to join online, pay online, choose the committees that you want to join online, be able to now network and collaborate with your colleagues from across the continent and its diaspora online and so on. So that's our response. Join organizations like Palu, work with like-minded people. We're working on the technologies to make it very smooth for you, and watch this space. Within a month, it will be there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes to go. I'll reserve Mr. Patel for last. Any closing remarks from Mr. Silva?
Mr. Silva is still having problems with his internet.
All right. I hope you can hear me this time.
Yeah.
There was no. Am I coming through? Are you getting me, Mr. Patel?
Very broken.
Yes.
It comes very broken. Yeah.
Now, there was an earlier question raised about baby boomers, millennials, and tech adoption. Yeah, but so there was an earlier question raised about baby boomers, millennials, and tech adoption. We're now having another class of people coming on board, the COVID millennials. Now, the COVID millennials have been attending school at home. They've been doing Zoom parties for their birthdays. They will not allow the old status quo to override in terms of progress. So I'm seeing those as the early adopters, and we as the late majority in terms of adoption for this. So I think there is enough use case that has been demonstrated, to the extent that some people have argued that probably the lockdown needs to be extended so that these new innovations can be properly consolidated with time, so that they become very ripe products that can derive commercial value. That's all. Mr. Patel, you have the 3 minutes.
Yeah, Mr. Patel, you have a few minutes. Kindly just wrap it up.
Wrap it up. So
yes.
I suggest there is no wrap up. I suggest there's 3 things come out of this meeting. One is what Don keeps saying, and I've been talking for at least 10 years now, is the Internet of Fintech agreements. Okay, what I mean by that is, how can everyone have an interface to all stakeholders, no matter who you are? So the client then becomes the centerpiece. No matter what business you are, the client is the center, and you build an infrastructure. In tech terms, it's all the APIs that are needed to build this infrastructure for lawyers, banks, your grocery stores, etc. That's one hackathon. Second hackathon for Dawn, and the challenge is lawyers working 24/7, providing services outside Africa. Okay, I would like to take that challenge on and drill that. And Silva and Kwame, to see what the impact of economy would be on this, and then also look at what you call the Covilidians, or what I forget the term now, is fantastic. But it's true. I said the world is at a reset mode. So I hope nobody goes back to normal. I really hope so, not in a bad way, but in a good way. Because if you don't reset and reprogram yourself, you will die, okay? So you have to reset. Don't go back to normal. The normal is, there is no normal. Lying flat is not the normal, okay? So you have to jump and fight. Think of that lion every morning waking up and going out to hunt, and the antelope running away because he will be food. So final comment, either be lunch or go and eat lunch, okay? So look forward to round 2 of this with a more productive brainstorming debate way of doing this rather than a panel and lots of speeches. Thank you, James. Betty, you are on mute. Betty, you are on mute.
Thank you.
James, you're on mute. Yeah.
Mute, and we can't hear you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm saying there's no going back to normal.
Correct.
Because this is now the new normal. So we better embrace it, and thank you again. I'll call upon our chapter chair, Madam Neto, to please give a vote of thanks on behalf of all of us, to all those who started with us, to the few who have had to leave along the way, and to those who are still with us to the end. Welcome, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you very much to all the panelists and to all of us, all the people who are online. We are very grateful. We are excited that you are able to do this. This has been a very insightful discussion. And one thing that is in my mind is adapt and innovate, because we are not going back to any other normal. We have a new normal. So we are very grateful that you are able to bring out this. They say adversity is the mother of all inventions, and a lot of there's a lot of discussion going on. There's a lot of suggestions on how lawyers can probably innovate. And one thing that is key here, and I hear from all the panelists, is that we must collaborate. We must start thinking of collaborating with other parties, like the tech industry. As lawyers, we must start doing this, and without watering down what the panelists have said, I want to say thank you to all of us. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. It is, we wish we could have had more time to discuss some of these things, but I believe that moving forward, we will, step up this discussion. Thank you very much. And I really want to appreciate the Lawyers Hub. The collaboration between the LSK Kisumu chapter and Lawyers Hub has done some justice during this COVID session, because they have always hosted that. And, this is something that we really appreciate. Linda and the team, thank you very much. May God bless you. We still look forward to having more discussions, and I'm very glad that people joined in and they really appreciate all this. Thank you very much. We will continue engaging more. And to our panelists, when we call upon you again, kindly accept, come in, because we value the discussion, we value the wealth of knowledge that is coming from you. And God bless all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think I just want to appreciate the collaboration that we have and the partnership that we have with the Law Society of Kisumu. And we're just extremely happy, and we hope to continue forward on this thing.
Thank you. See you, Guru Patel. Greet everybody in Romania.
Thank you. See you guys.
God bless you.
God bless you.
Goodbye. It's gone.